Thanks, Nick. Can you hear me? All right, so I prepared this talk as a talk in the academia, so I hope you guys are interested in this subject and some of the techniques we used. Here are my coworkers and the funding support and IT support. So I will just skip this because you don't know any of these people. So I thought I will give a short introduction what Shiptracks are. So visually you can see these white lines, linear features. I pointed out that's a Shiptracks. So basically these are over the open ocean. This is, I think, is in North Atlantic. And these are produced by large ships going underneath these clouds. And one thing that you can immediately see is they make the clouds brighter. And that's related to some of the questions we want to tackle in climate science. So, and it's first discovered, they are first discovered 60 years ago when the first satellites were sent to the space. And they were called enormous cloud lines. And it caused some stir. So what produced these lines are not clear. And when they find out that these are produced by ships, they extracted attentions first from the military, because at that time, you can imagine military ships are trying to maneuver and they are hiding around, getting to the position, and the other side is trying to detect these ships. And normally underneath the cloud, you couldn't detect them because you can't see them. But with this kind of feature, you can sort of infer some ships are underneath the cloud. But it turns out it's not that useful because not all the clouds can produce this kind of ship tracks. What they are used for is to actually study cloud physics and climate. So let me do this slide is a little cropped. But so what this is a high-profile publication using Shiptracks. You can see in the image. They hand-logged these Shiptrack features in red, and they picked up random points around the ships so that you can compare what cloud features are changing. And the purpose of that, I'll get into touch with in the next few slides. But what they found is this. The lines are just showing when you're cutting through across the Shiptrack lines, how the number of cloud droplets or amount of water inside a cloud or number of particles in the air changes when you are within Shiptracks, so these two regions, or in the background. So that they compared these features and determined the pollutions emitted by ships has a huge impact on these quantities like number of cloud droplets or amount of water in the clouds and the pollution particles themselves. And at the time, people are concerned with, starting to concern with climate change. That was right around when James Hansen, he was a famous climate scientist, gave us warnings about global warming. So it's 1980s. And the cloud physics immediately realized the Shiptracks are good experiments to study climate science. So let me give you an idea why I say that. So this is a picture taken by Voyager 1. It's a famous spacecraft in the 1970s, like billions miles away. And you see that pale blue dot right here. Can you see it? Like a little in the band here. That's Earth. And that the brightness you see is basically sunlight reflected by the Earth's total Earth. And so this is how we think about climate. It's down to the simplest terms. It's an energy balance between the solar coming in and reflected back into space, and the grays are the infrared radiation, so basically heat released by Earth. And when they're coming in balance, we have a temperature. Basically, the heat released by Earth is determined by the temperature of the Earth. Then the amount of sunlight reflected back to space is determined by the brightness of the Earth. And so when climate changes, some stuff will change. For example, if you look at the Earth's picture, you see a lot of clouds. And one of the things that's going to change is the clouds. And because clouds are so bright and they determine how much sunlight is reflected back to space. And if you go back to that energy balance, you know if you change the amount of energy reflected back to space, you're going to change the Earth's temperature and climate. So that's where the relevance comes in. So if you look at the complicated energy balance of the Earth, you see this term that's called reflected shortwave cloud. So 47 watts. So that's a huge amount of energy that's reflected every second on every square meters. So a big uncertainty in terms of our understanding in climate science is how human pollutions, you want to look at the fourth column from the bottom, how human pollutions have changed the clouds and therefore changed the cloud brightness, therefore have how do they change the amount of energy balance reflected back to space. And it turns out that's a really complicated problem because clouds are really hard to understand, hard to capture, hard to observe. So, and this question is related to Shiptracks because, as you can see, that's direct experiments over the ocean, how pollutions, which is released by ships, they change the clouds, right? They sometimes even make more clouds. So that's like the best analog we have in terms of large scale. Every ship track you see here is about 10 to 20 kilometers wide, hundreds of kilometers long. So that's the best experiment we have in terms of studying this pollution and cloud interactions. The problem is, in the last 60 years, this is the state of art, sort of how many ship tracks we sampled. Because as you can see, every ship track, these are the best ones, so it's relatively easy to hand log them. And if you look, I just listed a few here. Every one of these studies involve about 2 PhDs. So behind these samples, there were 2 PhD students spend like 3 to 4 years just hand log all these samples before they can do analysis and come up with science to advance our understandings. So it's both time-consuming and very laborious. For a PhD, like do this kind of work is not fun. So our idea, of course, is to, as you can already imagine, to use the technology we have to come up large samples because we need the larger number of samples to really tackle the problem. So NASA has a lot of data, and because we have a fleet of satellites, between the data and the insights we want is the technology because all the time. But time and effort is really expensive. And if we want a lot of samples, we better have technology to solve this. And I listed here deep learning plus experts because as one of the panelists I was talking about, simply relying on models sometimes give you unknown false positives or negatives. If you don't understand the model, complicated model enough, you can't really trust those completely. So you want the expert into the loop. So I listed a few sort of limitations and advantages on each side. Deep learning is really powerful because they have a lot of parameters, they have a lot of expressive power, but they also have limitations because they are trained on human labeled samples, as you will see, and sometimes they don't generalize well, and they don't really understand them because they're so complicated. So that's why we took this sort of hybrid approach. And without going into details, we trained ensemble models because what we found is for the same problem, if you use different architectures, the model performance has sort of shortcomings and weaknesses in different aspects. But when you do ensemble and average them out, you take advantage of the both. So here are the two models we used, and on the left side is probably anyone with any experience with segmentations know this model. It's widely used. It's simple. It's easy to build. On the right side is more complicated. Without going into details, it solves the problem of sort of large contextual features without costing too much additional computational requirement. So here are some of the examples that we get, and to illustrate the point I was saying. So on the left side are the input images. In the middle are 3 different model outputs. On the right side is the quote-unquote truth because it's human labeled. So we showed sort of different complexities of the situation. On the left, lowest most example, you can see it's pretty challenging. Without a larger context, you can't really see this is a Shiptracks feature. But the model is well trained and it captures it. What I'm going to point you at is the first example. Here, the model actually detects a Shiptracks on the upper right corner, while the human really missed it. On the 2 other examples, the model and humans are sort of in agreement. And if you go to more complicated features, inputs, you find that humans sometimes just simply slacking off. This is the human ground truth. It's just missed so many true positives. And sometimes humans are, in this first example, it's basically humans taking a false positive as a ground truth, as a positive. And again, you can see we trained multiple models and do averaging. So these are individual models, and this is the averaging results. And you can see the average results, usually it's performing better than individual ones. And once we have that, and we can sort of use the model, apply it to the larger images like this, and so you get things like that. So then we can get to the results. This is kind of the first climatology. So it means this, here we get about 12 million samples of Shiptracks. So going back to the table, if you remember, the most state-of-the-art was like 5,000. So we immediately get orders of magnitude of more samples. And out of this, we can do all kinds of interesting analysis. So first of all, you can see we capture, the green lines are basically the shipping lanes. And the Shiptracks detected sort of matched up with these green lines correctly. And we did some indirect validations here using AIS data. I think Dion was the director for Big Bear AI. So here, again, we showed some on the left side. That's the Shiptracks we detected. This is the shipping lanes identified by the AIS data for these 2 regions, South Africa and South America. And so this is just confirmation. And sometimes we find surprises too. And this is using nighttime data. Looking at East Asia, this is AIS data. This is the detected Shiptracks using nighttime satellite data. What you see is in the, say, for example, the strait, It's a nice match. But if you look at the area sort of east of Russia and Korea, there's a shipping lane connecting a port from North Korea and a port in the far east of Russia. And if you look at the AIS data map on the right, you don't see that. So that means something's going on, because these ships are not reporting back to the AIS data while we can detect them. So that's kind of interesting. And this is looking at the shipping off coast of California. So we can detect all the features in the AIS data. And we can skip this. So this is looking at, this is looking at anomalies, because once we have the 20 years of data, we can start to look at anomalies and see what's going on. And so one of the things is the impact of fuels. Because we want to clean up the ships, we introduce different fuel standards in different periods. And you can immediately see most interesting is in terms of this period, 2015 and 2019. The zones close to the California and West Canada coasts are called emission control areas. So ships sailing under these areas have to be using clean fuels. So what the companies did was they essentially, did you see that positive anomaly outside of the ECAs? So that's what they do is they move ships out of that area, and they will just coasting along that ECA region, and when they try to hit the ports in the black dots, they will just cut through that ECA to reduce travel time. So we can detect this kind of anomalies in the data without really realizing. We detected this change before we know that that's because of the fuel change. And 2020, it's not because of COVID. It's because in 2020, we introduced globally a cleaner fuel standard. That's why we actually observed, if you look at global anomaly here, across the globe, ship tracks are disappearing. It's not because ships are disappearing, because they are using cleaner fuels. And cleaner fuels means less pollution. Less pollution means you have a less of a chance to produce this kind of ship tracks. So we can detect those stuff, and this is a more complicated plot, but I want you to just focus on the middle panel. We looked at the Northeast Pacific region and want to look at how the ship track density changes is related to international trade. And it turns out the ship track density actually tracks good the trade trends quite well. For example, in 2015 and 2016, China had a slowdown in terms of economics, and they reduced a lot of raw material imports. That's why you see less ship tracks during that period. And it come back again, but then this is when President Trump introduced the sort of trade restrictions with China, and you see the shipping activity comes down again. So it's kind of interesting to see totally unrelated data, sort of these economic activities. Now we want to go back to science. So as I introduced you to guys, the ultimate goal of these activities to get at the science. So once we can detect these ship tracks, another step is to automate the analysis process. So once we have these masks, so left side is with the mask included in pink, on the right is just a raw image. We have to pick out the control and ship track pixels automatically and analyze them. So we develop an algorithm to do that. And once we do that, we can apply it to 12 million ship track samples at once. So what we came out of it, maybe this is kind of boring for you guys. So we can definitively come up with answers like this. How the droplets inside the cloud, how have they changed within the Shiptracks compared to the control? How much water the clouds gain or lose? And most importantly, that's the cloud fraction. So how much clouds we have over the Earth change with pollution. And it turns out it does. And this is a paper under review, probably going to be accepted in one of the high-profile journals. So what we showed here is using this Shiptracks samples, we can come up with answers to the question I was talking about, the most uncertain aspect of the climate science. The overall conclusion can be summarized in this slide. So what it says is human pollutions have actually cooled Earth by about, since the pre-industrial times, by about a third of the greenhouse gas warming. So that means all the warming we have experienced so far is a result of masking by the pollution. In other words, without the pollution and its effect on clouds, we would have warmed much more. But the pollution is going away because we are cleaning up the energy sources using cleaner fuels. We are filtering all the power plants. We are introducing cleaner fuels to the ships. So the pollution will come down. That means it's likely the future warming is actually going to be more stronger than expected if the results we get here is right. So that's sort of the punchline in terms of science. And yeah, that's the summarized conclusion part. So essentially, we argue for a hybrid deep learning plus expert solution to the data problem to get the answer you want, because that's taking advantage of the both worlds. Experts are more reliable in terms of case by case. Deep learning is more complicated and powerful to scale up your solutions. Yeah, so that's my talk. And I'll take questions if you guys have any.
I'll try to keep it brief. I know we're kind of reaching our end here. So first of all, can you speak at all to the amount of time and, if possible, cost in dollars of the training?
That's a good question. Time is actually not too great, because this is kind of like a binary classification problem, and we essentially, the total number of training samples is around 20,000. So as you can imagine, 20,000 files. We break the files into, because each file we have is like 2,000 by 1,500, so we break it into 400 by 400. So that gets you to about 100K. So that's still not a lot. In terms of dollars, I don't know. I can't calculate that, yeah.
Fair. Second question, is any of the data that you've used for the analysis in your paper going to be made open source?
Yes. Yeah. The short answer is yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Last question. So in terms of, I think the field is called geoengineering.
Yeah.
This sort of counterintuitive, ironic, pollution's kind of also helped, even as it's ruined everything else.
Yep.
Does the results of this study, which are awesome, do they make you more hopeful to the idea that we could purposefully seed or aerosolize clouds in order to raise the Earth's albedo?
Oh, wow. I didn't realize we have an expert in the crowd. So yeah, those are really good questions. The short answer is no. But geoengineering, in my opinion, can only act as a sort of a tool for emergency responses because it doesn't solve the root of the problem. So for example, if our results hold, indeed, if you send out a bunch of ships to the ocean, makes clouds brighter, it can cool down the Earth by a few tens of degrees in a short period of time. But that overall temperature decrease doesn't mean it's not equally applied to the whole globe. It can actually introduce circulation changes in terms of monsoon. So India may affect it positively or negatively, depends on the monsoon changes. So the regional impact is very uncertain. And plus, once you stop it, the warming will come back in vengeance and quickly. So
it's a break glass in case of emergency, or I guess
yeah.
Pollute clouds in case of emergency.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to a geoengineering conference in June, so we'll discuss sort of theoretical aspect of it. What if we have to implement such a solution? Where do we apply it? How do we apply it? These are all questions we have to think about. Yeah.
Thank you.